everybody, today we have an exciting episode. We are going to be talking about harvesting and fermentation and growing cacao. Today we are harvesting for the first time this year. It's really late in the season, it's December 2nd, and for whatever reason the cacao in Hawaii on the windward side came really late. What I have in front of me right now is a cacao tree that's somewhere between 8 and 10 months. At least that's the size that it should be. This is actually older. Our orchard kind of got flooded and, well, it stunted everything. This is kind of a tedious process in the beginning because you really have to baby them. You know, you'll get things like these little suckers that come off. They're called chupons. You want to cut them off. You want all the energy to go straight up into a tree that then jorquettes, which is when it branches out into a 3, 5, whatever will be the future canopy. So we ended up staking it. We used a little zip tie. It kept it from blowing over in the wind, which is our main enemy here in Hawaii. We also have something called rose beetles. They love to eat the young leaves, which is detrimental in the beginning. It can really stunt or even kill the cacao trees for the first year or two of its life. So what often happens is a cage is around it for the very first few, maybe a year, 8 months, until it grows out of that cage and jorquettes again. So let's move on to another tree and we'll talk about the next step in the process. Alright, so we're next to another tree in our younger orchard. This tree is maybe just over 2 years old, and this is a very happy, healthy 2-year-old tree. It does need a bit of pruning. It got too full, so we need to open up some of the inner branches, but it's getting its first pods, it's getting its first flowers. Now at this stage, it makes sense to actually cut all those pods off and not let them develop, because too much energy will end up going into the fruit instead of going into what should be trees growing bigger to support more fruit for really the third or 3.5 years, where we'll probably want to harvest from it at that point and hopefully have 5 fruit instead of 1, or maybe 10 fruit even. It depends on the genetics. So this tree did really well, whatever the parents are, compared to a lot of the other ones around here. Okay, so this is a tree that's maybe about 4 years old. It's very happy. There's going to probably be 20 fruit on it that we'll get off of it this year. You can see most of them are still green and at various sizes. They don't all ripen at the same time in most cases, but you can see now we've got one that's very ripe. We've got a few that are starting to yellow, so maybe these will be ready in a week, and then the rest will just be varied throughout the rest of the season. But at 4 years old, we let a lot of we'd clip off pods the first year. We kept the architecture easy to harvest, so most of the fruit is low in the part of the tree that can really support the weight, because the pods are so heavy. If you're ending up with fruit way on these outer branches, the branches are going to break. So we really want to see the fruit on the main trunk and on this crotch here. And what we can do now is we can come in and harvest so quickly, and if you have a big orchard, you don't want to have to spend even a couple extra seconds more per pod than you have to. You want to be able to go roll through that orchard and harvest everything at a very easy to reach elevation. So this is a great example of that. Moving on. Alright, so here's a tree that's just cranking out pods. It's God, they're beautiful. I hope that inside the seeds have enough pulp on them still, because they're starting to look like they might even be too ripe. Now, what we'll do is we'll harvest them all real quick. It'll roll down the hill. These trees on the hillside are doing super well because we live in a very wet area and the hillside has drainage, whereas a lot of the other areas on the farm, the roots actually stay too wet. It's too wet everywhere and doesn't have enough drainage, whereas here it gets plenty of water, and then the feet of the tree, the roots are not wet. So you can see the canopy's now closed everywhere on this hillside, and it's a fight for light. So what happens is, you can see the tree right next door shot up a little sucker root, and it went straight up and broke through the canopy and is now the next level of the canopy. But these are understory trees, so they're used to not having a lot of light. But this is, yeah, this is looking great. This is about 4 years old as well, maybe 4.5. And the trees just did really well. So we're going to harvest a pod here and see what's going on inside. Let's take this guy right here. You want to cut just at the base. You don't really want to break them off or rip them off. You want to cut them off because next year, that's where the flowers grow back from again. So you don't want to mess up these areas too much. So let's go ahead and now cut this guy in half. It's really interesting that everything ripened at exactly the same time pretty much. Alright, so this is good. It's important that it's not too transparent, because what will end up happening is you'll lose a lot of the brick levels. The sugar levels will be too low at that point. So this is still good. This we'd put in the ferment. And that's going to happen today at some point. You don't want to wait too long before these go into a fermentation box, because otherwise the sugar levels drop too much and the material is not as good when you start with. So this is like any other fruit. If you want the very best end product, you have to harvest the ripe fruit. You don't want overripe fruit. You don't want underripe fruit. You want perfectly ripe fruit, and that is what's going to taste the best. So that's really important. Yeah, we'll see what happens next. We're all going to crack pods open. Alright, so here we have a small harvest, and all of this is now going to be analyzed, making sure that it's all ripe before it goes into a bucket, which we will then group together with another bunch of farmers so that we can get a big enough ferment, because it's really important to have a certain volume in order to get the yeasts and bacteria to start the fermentation process. So here we can see that a lot of the pods, they're kind of like half green, half yellow. This is still just okay, it's borderline. But then we found some like this. This definitely should not make it into the ferment because it's just not ripe. The sugar levels won't be there. These guys too. Anything like this cannot go into the ferment. Now we see pods that are yellow, they start it as green. And pods that are orange sometimes start as a real deep maroon color. Something like this would turn very, even this is really underripe, would turn very tropical, orangey, sunrise look. So this is what we got from our first harvest. It's maybe 120 trees total, maybe half that is producing, and this is the first harvest of the season. So hopefully the next few will be a lot bigger, and it'll go all the way through May. Okay, so this is the last pod of the harvest. Some interesting things about this is the pod and the seeds, the reduction is about 20% seed to the pod. So all of this here turned into one 5-gallon bucket, or even a little bit less. And so I'm gonna open this last guy up. And hopefully that guy pulls out. All right. So we don't want anything other than the seeds in here. So we don't want the inner part, which is called the placenta. And we want to make sure that nothing's germinated and that there's enough pulp on the outside of the seed so that that's what's actually fermenting. Make sure there's nothing left in there. There we go. And so then the last thing is all this is going to get grouped together with another bunch of another ferment, and this, once it's fermented, will be about 30% of this weight. So there's just these massive reductions. From here to here is 20%, and from here to a dried seed that we would start with as chocolate makers is like 33%. So that's been another episode of Craft Chocolate TV. Thanks for watching. See you next time.